You know, the kind people who switch their porch bulb to purple for Halloween or green for a sports team. The sort of harmless little announcement to the street that says we're festive, we're friendly, we're here. So when I turned onto Weller Street at 11:47 p.m. and saw one porch burning a thick, wet-looking red, my brain tried to file it under taste and NBSP, but the red wasn't tasteful. And NBSP, it didn't glow like a normal bulb. It looked like something under the skin of the night, like the house was bleeding light through its front window. The shadows around it didn't soften the way shadows should. They curled. And NBSP, and the strangest part was the street itself. Weller Street wasn't on my usual route home, but a detour sign had shoved traffic off the main road. The neighborhood was old trees bending low like they were tired of holding themselves up. Mailboxes leaning, sidewalks cracked into puzzle pieces. Every house had its own version of dark, blue-black, coal-black, velvet-black, and NBSP every house except that one. And NBSP, the house with the red porch light, sat at the very end of the street in a cul-de-sac that shouldn't have existed. On the map in my head, Weller ended at a T-intersection. It did not end in a neat circle like a child's drawing, yet there it was. A bulbous little dead end, quiet as a shut mouth. And NBSP, I didn't even realize I'd slowed down until the car behind me honked. A quick, irritated bark, like move. I did. I drove on. I went home. I told myself it was nothing. And NBSP, then my phone buzzed as I pulled into my apartment lot. And NBSP, unknown number. If you ever see a red porch light, don't knock. And NBSP, no hello, no name, just that. And NBSP, I stared at the message until the screen dimmed. My first thought was prank. My second thought was, how did they know I saw it? I hadn't told anyone. I hadn't posted. I hadn't even stopped the car long enough for someone to notice me noticing. And NBSP, I went upstairs and tried to laugh it off. I made instant noodles. I watched a half episode of something mindless. Still, the red light stuck in my eyes like the afterimage of staring at the sun. When I blinked, I could see it faintly on the inside of my eyelids. A round, pulsing coin of red. And NBSP, near 2 a.m., I got up to pee and checked the blinds out of habit. My window overlooked the parking lot. A few cars slept under the yellow hum of lampposts. And NBSP, and in the far corner where the fence line cut into shadow, there was a dot of red. And NBSP, small, distant, impossible to mistake. And NBSP, a porch light. And NBSP, except there weren't any porches out there. Just chain link, weeds, and the black backs of buildings. And NBSP, I pulled the blinds all the way up. Heart thumping. And the red dot vanished instantly as if it had been waiting for my eyes. And now that it had them, it didn't need to pretend anymore. And NBSP, my phone buzzed again. And NBSP, unknown number. You looked. And NBSP, the noodles turned to cement in my stomach. And NBSP, I sat back on my bed, suddenly aware of every little apartment sound. The refrigerator's murmur, the pipes settling, someone's TV bleeding through the wall. Normal noises. Human noises, comforting, except they felt thin, like cardboard scenery in front of something deeper. And NBSP, I typed, who is this? Then deleted it. I typed, is this a joke? Then deleted that too. My fingers hovered over the glass like it might bite. And NBSP, another message arrived before I could decide. And NBSP, unknown number. Rules are only rules if you follow them. And NBSP, then, don't knock. And NBSP, I slept with the lights on. Not because I believed in the warning. I told myself it was because my nerves were fried, because I'd had a long week, because humans are suggestible, because a red bulb is just a bulb. And NBSP, but my dreams were full of doors. And NBSP, doors in hallways that narrowed as I walked. Doors with peepholes that blinked like eyes. Doors with thresholds that looked like teeth. And NBSP, and in every dream, I stood with my fist raised, hovering a breath away from knocking, because something on the other side was holding its breath, too waiting to hear whether I would ask to be let in. And NBSP, morning light should have made it silly. And NBSP, it didn't. And NBSP, in the daylight, the warning felt worse, not like a superstition, but like a fact that hadn't been fully explained. If you ever see a red porch light, don't knock. It read like the kind of sentence you'd find in a safety manual written by someone who'd seen the machinery eat a hand. And NBSP, I tried to be rational. I called the number. It didn't ring. It didn't go to voicemail. It simply ended, like dialing into a hole. And NBSP, I showed the texts to my coworker, Jessa, during lunch. She squinted at my phone like it was an insect. And NBSP creepy, she said, but her mouth curled like she was enjoying it. Maybe it's one of those neighborhood things, like those porch lights that mean you support something. And NBSP support what? I asked. And NBSP Jessa shrugged. Red means danger, or passion, or stop signs, or maybe it's for vampires. And NBSP, please don't make it vampires. And NBSP, she laughed, then stopped when she saw my face. Okay, sorry. But seriously, did you Google it? And NBSP, that night I did. I searched red porch light, don't knock. I searched red porch light, meaning I searched Weller Street cul-de-sac. I got the usual results. Decorative lighting, holiday bulbs, vague forum posts about odd houses, and a few urban legends that read like recycled campfire stories. One thread mentioned a red light house in a different state where people claimed a woman would answer the door and invite you inside, and after that you'd never be the same. And NBSP, it was all mush. Nothing solid, nothing that matched my street, my timing, my texts. And NBSP still, by Friday, curiosity had started to itch through my fear. Not the fun kind of curiosity, the kind that feels like a splinter under the skin. If you can't see it, you can't pull it out. And if you can't pull it out, you can't stop thinking about it. And NBSP, so I drove back to Weller Street. And NBSP, I told myself I was just confirming it existed. I told myself I wouldn't stop. I told myself I wouldn't even turn onto that end bit if it looked wrong. And NBSP, but the detour signs were gone now, and I had to choose to go. That made it worse somehow. Like the street was no longer an accident, but an appointment I was keeping. And NBSP Weller Street in daylight looked smaller, less haunted, more ordinary. The cul-de-sac at the end was there, yes, but it felt off, like someone had smudged the geometry. The circle wasn't perfectly round. The houses didn't line up quite right. Even the trees seemed to lean away from that last house, leaving it exposed like a rotten tooth. And NBSP, the porch light was off. And NBSP in the sun, the house was plain. Pale siding, narrow windows, a porch with two chairs that faced each other as if in conversation. There was a welcome mat that said hello in friendly block letters. There were wind chimes that didn't move even when the breeze stirred the leaves. And NBSP, I parked a few houses up and sat with my hands on the wheel. And NBSP, my phone buzzed in my cup holder. And NBSP, unknown number, close enough to smell it now. And NBSP, I looked around fast. Nobody on the sidewalk, no one in a window. A dog barked somewhere far away. The normal hum of life continued as if nothing had changed. And NBSP, my mouth went dry. I typed, "What do you want?" and hit send. And NBSP, the three dots appeared immediately, like the sender had been waiting with their fingers poised. And NBSP, unknown number, I want you to decide. And NBSP me, decide what? And NBSP, unknown number, whether you're the kind of person who knocks. And NBSP, I stared at the house. Its windows were dark even in full daylight, like tinted sunglasses. The porch seemed too clean, no leaves, no dust. It looked recently swept, recently prepared. And NBSP, prepared for what? And NBSP, my heart beat a little faster. The urge to step out of the car swelled like a tide. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It felt personal, like the house had looked at me first and I was only returning the gaze. And NBSP, I made myself do something normal. I turned the car off. I opened the door. The air smelled like grass and hot pavement. Somewhere down the street, a sprinkler ticked rhythmically, mechanical and comforting. And NBSP, I walked, slow toward the end of the cul-de-sac. My shoes sounded too loud on the sidewalk. And NBSP, every step, the house seemed to sharpen. Not in my vision, more like in my attention. Like it was becoming the only thing worth focusing on. The rest of the neighborhood blurred into background noise. And NBSP, halfway there, my phone buzzed again. And NBSP, unknown number. You can still turn around. And NBSP, I stopped walking. I looked back at my car. It sat under a tree like a patient animal, waiting for me to climb back inside. And NBSP, I could have listened. I could have left. And NBSP, but it's a terrible thing realizing how much of you is built out of spite. How much of you wants to prove you can do whatever you want just because someone told you not to. And NBSP, I kept walking. And NBSP, when I stepped onto the curb of the cul-de-sac, the wind died. The sprinkler sound cut out mid-tick like someone had yanked the plug. The dog barking stopped. The world didn't go silent, it went listening. And NBSP, the house looked the same, but now I noticed details I hadn't before. And NBSP, the welcome mat's letters weren't printed. They were stitched, hand-sewn. Each loop a little uneven, like someone had made it with care. The porch chairs were old wood, polished smooth by use. The front door had no peephole, and NBSP instead, it had a small circle of glass at eye level, not a peephole, a window. And NBSP, the glass was red, and NBSP, not stained glass, pretty red, not ruby, not cherry. And NBSP, the same wet, pulsing red as that porch light had been. And NBSP, I stood at the bottom step, staring at it, and felt my throat tighten with the certainty that something on the other side was staring back. And NBSP, my phone buzzed in my pocket, but I didn't look. I didn't want the words. I already knew what it would say. And NBSP, I climbed the steps. And NBSP, the porch boards didn't creak. They didn't make any sound at all under my weight, like the house refused to acknowledge me until I did the proper thing. And NBSP, I stood in front of the door. And NBSP, the red circle of glass reflected my face, but not quite correctly. The angle was wrong. The expression was wrong. My reflection looked anticipatory, like it was about to smile. And NBSP, I raised my fist, and NBSP, my knuckles hovered an inch from the wood. And NBSP, and then the porch light above me clicked on by itself. And NBSP red, and NBSP, it washed my skin in blood color, turned my shadow into a black cutout pasted to the wall. And NBSP, my phone vibrated so hard it felt like it might jump out of my pocket. And NBSP, I pulled it out. And NBSP, unknown number, now you're at the right door. And NBSP, my fist trembled. And NBSP, behind the wood, I heard something soft. And NBSP, a sound like a person pressing their ear close to listen. And NBSP, then a breath slow, careful, delighted. And NBSP, like someone savoring the moment before a meal. And NBSP, I wish I could tell you I ran. And NBSP, that I snapped out of it, turned, bolted down the porch steps, drove home shaking, and spent the rest of my life telling the story as a near miss. And NBSP, but the truth is uglier and more ordinary. And NBSP, I knocked. And NBSP, not hard, not aggressive, just 2 gentle taps, polite as a visitor. And NBSP, the effect was immediate. And NBSP, the air changed. And NBSP, it thickened like humidity. The red light seemed to push against my eyes. My ears popped as if I'd gone up in altitude. Somewhere in the house, wood shifted with the slow patience of something waking up. And NBSP, a voice came through the door, soft and close as if the speaker's lips were pressed to the other side. And NBSP, thank you, it said. And NBSP, not who is it, not can I help you. And NBSP, thank you. And NBSP, my stomach dropped. And NBSP, I swallowed and forced myself to speak. Hi, sorry, I think I made a mistake. And NBSP, the red circle of glass, showed my reflection again, but now it wasn't reflecting the porch behind me. It reflected a hallway long, narrow, lit in red. The hallway wasn't in my line of sight. It shouldn't have been visible. And NBSP, yet there it was, behind my own face like a second image. And NBSP, the voice sighed in a way that almost sounded like relief. Mistakes are only mistakes when they can be undone. And NBSP, my phone buzzed. I didn't have to look to know, but I did anyway. And NBSP, unknown number, you knocked. And NBSP, my mouth tasted like pennies. I tried the handle without thinking, one quick test. And NBSP, it turned easily. And NBSP, the door swung inward a few inches on silent hinges, offering a slice of red-lit hallway. The air that spilled out smelled faintly of warm dust and something metallic, like the inside of an old radiator. And NBSP, the voice whispered, come in. And NBSP, I took a half step back. No, I'm sorry. I didn't mean. And NBSP, a sound then, not a word. A small laugh, tender and intimate, like it knew me. And NBSP, do you know what knocking means? The voice asked. It's a question. It's asking permission. It's admitting you want something. And NBSP, I don't want anything, I said, and heard the lie in it even as it left my mouth. And NBSP, the red light above me hummed, not an electrical hum, a living one, like a throat clearing. And NBSP, you wanted to know, the voice said, almost kindly. You wanted the rule to be wrong. And NBSP, my heart hammered. I thought about slamming the door shut and running. I thought about calling the police, about explaining. There's a weird house with a red light and it's texting me. I pictured the dispatcher's pause, the polite tone, the quiet judgment. And NBSP, the door crept open another inch on its own. And NBSP, the red hallway inside, seemed longer now. I could see more of it, wallpaper patterned with tiny repeating doors. A runner rug that looked damp, like it had been dragged through rain. Frames on the wall holding pictures that were too dark to make out. And NBSP, somewhere deep inside, something moved. Not a person's footsteps. Something heavier. Something that shifted weight slowly, as if it had many joints to coordinate. And NBSP, my phone buzzed again. And NBSP, unknown number. Last chance to shut it. And NBSP, I grabbed the edge of the door with my free hand. The wood was warm, not sun-warmed, body-warm. And NBSP, I pulled, intending to close it. And NBSP, the door resisted not by force but by stickiness, like there was a film between my palm and the wood that didn't want to break contact. I yanked harder, and for a second the door moved toward the frame. And NBSP, from inside the hallway, the voice sharpened, no longer gentle. And NBSP, don't be rude. And NBSP, I froze. And NBSP, the red circle of glass, showed my reflection again. Only now my reflection's hand wasn't on the door. And NBSP, it was on the inside. And NBSP, as if I was already standing in that hallway, holding the door open for myself. And NBSP, my breath hitched. What is this? And NBSP, an invitation, the voice said. You asked. And NBSP, I didn't. And NBSP, you knocked. The voice was patient, final. And NBSP, the door suddenly swung open wide, not violently, but decisively, like a host stepping aside to let a guest enter. The red light spilled out and wrapped around my ankles. The air from inside licked at my skin, dry and warm. And NBSP, I should have run then. And NBSP instead. My eyes locked on the frames on the wall inside the hall. And NBSP, the closest one, held a photo. And NBSP, it was a picture of me sitting in my car in the cul-de-sac, taken from an angle that could only have been from the house's upstairs window. And NBSP, except the photo wasn't a phone picture. It was printed, old-fashioned glossy paper behind glass. And NBSP, next to it, another frame. Me at my apartment window last night, lifting the blinds. And NBSP, another. Me at work, laughing at something Jessa said, unaware. And NBSP, my throat squeezed tight. How? And NBSP, every door has two sides, the voice murmured. We watch our side. You watch yours. And then you knock, and you make it the same side. And NBSP, behind me, somewhere on the street, a car passed. I heard its tires on the pavement, the casual sound of someone going somewhere else, someone not trapped in this moment. And NBSP, I turned my head slightly, desperate to see the normal world. And NBSP, the neighborhood behind me, looked wrong now. The colors were drained, like an old photo left in the sun. The trees seemed too still, the sky too flat. Even the air felt staged. And NBSP, like the real world, was the hallway, and this was the reflection. And NBSP, the voice inside the house, whispered, almost affectionate, if you leave without coming in, you'll take the light with you. And NBSP, I don't want it, I rasped. And NBSP, but the truth was, part of me did. And NBSP, I could feel it in my chest, a hot coin of red, pulsing where fear and curiosity met. I'd opened something. I'd started a question. And NBSP, and the worst thing about questions is that they itch until you answer them. And NBSP, I stepped over the threshold. And NBSP, the moment my foot landed on the runner rug, the door shut behind me with a soft click, gentle as a kiss. And NBSP, the red hallway brightened. And NBSP, the air became perfectly still, like a held breath. And NBSP, and then the voice, no longer at the door but everywhere at once, said, and NBSP, welcome home. And NBSP, the hallway was longer than it had looked. And NBSP, not in a trick of the eye way, in a physically impossible way. I walked forward and the door behind me did not recede like it should. It remained the same distance back no matter how many steps I took, as if space had become a loop. And NBSP, the wallpaper of tiny doors, seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at it. The little door patterns moved like a school of fish. When I stared, they froze into place. And NBSP, the frames along the wall continued, but the photos changed as I walked. Past images of me were replaced with images I didn't remember living. Me standing in the kitchen of this same house, stirring something in a pot while red light washed my hands. Me asleep on a couch I'd never owned. Me smiling at a mirror, my teeth too white, my eyes too calm. And NBSP at the end of the hall, a doorway yawned open into a room lit entirely by that same wet red. No lamps, no bulbs. The walls themselves seemed to emit it, like the paint was alive. And NBSP in the center of the room was a table. And NBSP on the table, a small brass bell, an old ledger book, and a bowl of keys. And NBSP, not modern keys, not car fobs. Old keys, each one unique, each one heavy with use. Some had teeth like saw blades. Some were so ornate they looked ceremonial. Some were rusted down to fragile skeletons. And NBSP, I stood at the threshold of the room, suddenly afraid to step any farther. And NBSP, a figure, sat at the table. And NBSP, at first I thought it was a person hunched over the ledger, writing. But as my eyes adjusted, the shape stopped behaving like something my brain could name. Its outline was wrong, like a shadow trying to imitate a human posture. When it moved, it did so with a lag like my reflection in those dreams, half a beat behind. And NBSP, it looked up. And NBSP, I realized it didn't have eyes. And NBSP, where eyes should have been, were two small circles of red glass, like the one in the front door. And behind that glass, something watched. And NBSP, the figure's mouth stretched into a smile that didn't belong on a human face. Too wide, too practiced, like it had learned the shape from pictures. And NBSP, you knocked, it said. And this time the voice came from the figure itself, not the walls. So we opened. And NBSP, my skin prickled. Let me out. And NBSP, the smile widened. Out is a door. Doors are agreements. And NBSP, I didn't agree to anything. And NBSP, the figure, placed the pen down with care. You asked permission. That's what knocking is. You asked, may I enter? May I be known? May I cross? And when someone answers, your question becomes a bridge. And NBSP twist my head hard, as if I could shake the whole way away. This is insane. I just curiosity, and NBSP, the figure's head tilted slow. Curiosity is a hunger. Hunger is a kind of prayer. And NBSP, it gestured to the bowl of keys. The keys clinked softly, like teeth. And NBSP, pick one, it said. And NBSP, I'm not picking anything. And NBSP, the figure's smile softened into something almost sympathetic. Then one will pick you. And NBSP, a sound came from behind me in the hallway, a soft tapping. And NBSP, two gentle knocks, polite as a visitor. And NBSP, my blood went cold. And NBSP, the figure's red glass gaze flicked past me, toward the door I'd come through. Do you hear that? It whispered, delighted. Someone is asking. And NBSP, I forced myself to turn. And NBSP, the hallway behind me was darker now. The red dimmed to a bruise color. At the far end, impossibly farther, was the outline of the front door. And NBSP, and in the little red circle of glass, I could see a face. And NBSP, my face. And NBSP standing on the porch. And NBSP, fist raised. And NBSP, ready to knock. And NBSP, no, I said, and my voice cracked like dry wood. No, 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 and NBSP, the tapping came again. Closer now, traveling down the hall like footsteps that were also knocks. And NBSP, the figure at the table, leaned forward. If you don't choose a key, the door will choose you as a key. And NBSP, I don't understand. And NBSP, you will, it promised. And NBSP, the bowl of keys, began to tremble very slightly, as if something beneath the table was breathing. And NBSP, the tapping grew louder. And NBSP, I did the only thing I could think to do. I lunged for the front door because even if space was wrong, even if the hallway looped, I needed to try. I ran, my shoes thudding on the runner rug that felt damp underfoot. The wallpaper doors rippled in my peripheral vision like a living pattern. And NBSP, the tapping followed, now a steady rhythm behind me, like a patient thing pursuing. Knock, 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 and NBSP. I reached the front door and grabbed the handle. And NBSP, it was warm, like skin. And NBSP, I yanked. And NBSP, it didn't open. And NBSP, I slammed my shoulder into it. And NBSP, nothing. And NBSP, the red circle of glass, showed my reflection on the porch again, closer now, eyes wide, trembling fist lifted. And NBSP, and then God help me, my reflection turned its head and looked straight at me through the glass. And NBSP, it smiled. And NBSP, it knocked. And NBSP, the sound was deafening, not because it was loud, but because it was inside my bones. The moment it knocked, the door handle under my palm clicked and turned by itself. And NBSP, the door swung inward. And NBSP, not to the porch. And NBSP to the red hallway. And NBSP to the table. And NBSP to the figure, watching like a host. And NBSP behind me, the thing that looked like me, stepped inside. And NBSP, it moved with the same laggy rhythm I'd seen in the red glass, like a copy learning how to be real. Its face was my face, but the expression was too calm, too satisfied, like it had finally gotten what it wanted. And NBSP, it looked at me and said, in my own voice, "Thank you." And NBSP, I stumbled backward, tripping over my own feet, and fell hard onto the runner rug. My hands slapped the damp fabric. When I pulled them up, they smelled metallic, like pennies and old blood. And NBSP, the figure at the table, stood. And NBSP, it was taller than it had seemed. Taller in a way that didn't match the room. Its shoulders brushed the red light without casting a shadow. And NBSP, here is the rule, it said gently. If you knock, you ask to be let in. If you are let in, you must let something out. And NBSP, my copy, my visitor, walked toward me with slow certainty. It didn't rush. It didn't need to. It knelt beside me, and its red glass eyes, because now I saw them, faintly, behind my own, caught the light. And NBSP, it whispered, close enough that I felt its breath, "I'll be better at your life." And NBSP, I tried to scramble away, but the hallway seemed to tighten, like the house was drawing its walls in around me. My limbs felt heavy, as if the red light was turning my blood into syrup. And NBSP, the copy, stood and walked past me toward the open door. And NBSP, and as it crossed the threshold, the world outside the house came into focus for the first time since I'd entered. Blue sky, green trees, the normal street. And NBSP, my copy, stepped onto the porch. And NBSP, then it turned, smiled down at me kindly as if I was the strange one, and pulled the door closed. And NBSP, the latch clicked. And NBSP, the red light deepened. And NBSP, silence fell, thick and satisfied. And NBSP, I was alone with the hallway, the wallpaper doors, the damp runner rug, and the understanding settling into my bones like rot. And NBSP, I was not a guest. And NBSP, I was what had been traded. And NBSP, I don't know how long I stayed there. Time in that house doesn't move the way it does outside. Sometimes the hallway brightens as if someone has turned on a sun, and sometimes it dims until the red is barely a pulse. Sometimes I hear footsteps that are also Knox new visitors testing the rules. Sometimes I hear laughter like relief. And NBSP, sometimes I see the red circle of glass show the outside world. My apartment, my job, my friends, my copy, living cleanly, smoothly, like it's always belonged there. Nobody notices the difference because my copy is good at smiling, good at answering questions, good at pretending it never wanted anything more than to be let in. And NBSP, and then sometimes the porch light on the front door flicks on. And NBSP red. And NBSP not because it's night. And NBSP not because it's needed. And NBSP because the house is ready again. And NBSP because it's hungry again. And NBSP because someone is standing out there, staring up at the red glow, thinking it's a gimmick, thinking it's festive, thinking it's harmless. And NBSP, and somewhere deep inside the house, the thing at the table opens the ledger book and wets its pen. And NBSP because it knows the truth about people. And NBSP tell them not to knock, and all they can think about is the sound their knuckles would make. And NBSP, so if you ever see a red porch light, don't knock. And NBSP not because it's a superstition. And NBSP because it's a door that's already listening. And NBSP, and if you ask to be let in, and NBSP, something will be grateful. And NBSP, something will open. And NBSP, and it won't be you who walks back out. And NBSP story 2, and NBSP, the last bus home only runs after midnight. And NBSP, the first time I missed the 11:10 a.m., I told myself it was my own fault. And NBSP, that's what you say when you don't want to admit the world has teeth. And NBSP, I'd lingered after closing, wiping down counters that were already clean, stacking chairs that would be unstacked in the morning, dragging my exhaustion around like it was a mop. The diner smelled like burnt coffee and lemon disinfectant, a scent so familiar it had stopped feeling real. Outside, rain pressed its face against the windows, turning the streetlights into watery halos. And NBSP clock out, Marcy called from the register, the glow of her screen reflecting in the tired shine of her eyes. Go home before you melt into the tile. And NBSP, yeah, I lied, and kept wiping. And NBSP because home wasn't really home. Home was a studio apartment with a ceiling stain that looked like a spreading continent, neighbors that argued in languages I didn't speak, and a radiator that hissed like a warning. Home was quiet in a way that made your thoughts too loud. If I stayed late enough, I could pretend I was someone who chose to be here. And NBSP, when I finally stepped into the night, my apron tucked under my arm, the rain had settled into a mist. It clung to my skin and hair, slicked the sidewalk, muffled the city. The air tasted metallic, like the world had been chewing pennies. And NBSP, the bus stop was 3 blocks away, past a row of closed storefronts and the laundromat with the flickering open sign that never actually meant open. Usually, I caught the last normal route 6 before midnight, the one with the bright LED display, the driver who always smelled faintly of cologne, the seats that were only slightly sticky, and NBSP, but that night, the digital sign above the stop was blank, not broken blank, like it was waiting for something to be written on it. And NBSP, I checked my phone. 11:53, and NBSP across the street. A man in a hood stood under an awning, smoking with the patient posture of someone who'd been waiting a long time. When he noticed me, he didn't glance away like people usually do. He watched me steadily, and the ember of his cigarette pulsed like an eye. And NBSP, you missed it, he said, voice roughened by smoke or age. And NBSP Route 6? I asked, though I already knew. And NBSP, he nodded once. The regular one, yeah. And NBSP, I exhaled, feeling my shoulders sag. Next one's in the morning. And NBSP, he flicked ash into a puddle and smiled without showing his teeth. Not the last one. And NBSP, I frowned. There's another bus? And NBSP. He tilted his head toward the empty street, and for a moment, I could have sworn the mist was thicker in the direction he indicated, like the darkness there was breathing. Last bus home only runs after midnight, he said. Didn't anyone tell you? And NBSP, I almost laughed. It sounded like an urban legend, the kind of story people tell to make a city feel mysterious instead of hostile. Okay, I said, trying to keep my tone light. And where does it go? And NBSP home, he said, like that was the only answer that mattered. And NBSP, I should have walked away then, ordered a rideshare, called Marcy and begged to crash on a booth until sunrise. Anything except staying at that stop, letting the night convince me there was an option I hadn't known about. And NBSP, but my phone was at 8%. My paycheck barely covered rent, and the thought of walking 40 minutes through mist that turned alleys into mouths made my feet stay planted. And NBSP, what number? I asked, because if you treat a myth like a schedule, it feels safer. And NBSP, he didn't answer right away. He took one last drag, then crushed the cigarette under his boot with deliberate care. It doesn't have a number, he said. It has a time. And NBSP, the streetlight above the stop buzzed softly, and its glow dimmed as if the city itself was lowering its voice. And NBSP, my phone clicked to 11:59. And NBSP. The hooded man stepped closer, just enough that I could see the veins in his hands, dark against pale skin, like roots under thin ice. He leaned in as if he was about to tell me a secret, and maybe he was. And NBSP, don't pull the cord early, he murmured. And if the driver asks your name, don't give it. And NBSP, my stomach tightened. Why? And NBSP, he smiled again, still without teeth. Because you want to get home, he said. Not yet. Kept. And NBSP, before I could ask what that meant, the clock on my phone flipped. And NBSP 12:00. And NBSP, the air shifted. And NBSP, not the temperature, not the humidity. Something deeper, like the city had turned a page. The mist thickened into a gauzy curtain. and the sounds of distant traffic faded until there was only silence and the faint drip, drip, drip of water falling from an awning. And NBSP then, from far down the street, a rumble. And NBSP, it wasn't loud. It was low, subterranean, like something heavy moving beneath the asphalt. The hooded man's posture changed, his shoulders loosened, like someone finally hearing the footsteps they'd been waiting for. And NBSP, the bus, emerged from the mist the way a ship emerges from fog. Slow, inevitable, too large to feel real. And NBSP, it was an old model, the kind the city retired years ago. Its paint was a dull, bruised blue. The windows were darkened to near black, but not tinted more, like the light inside refused to show itself. The LED sign on the front didn't display a route number, and NBSP, it displayed a single word, in pale amber letters. And NBSP home, and NBSP the bus didn't hiss to a stop. It glided quiet as a thought, and the doors folded open with a sigh that sounded disturbingly like relief. And NBSP, for a second, I didn't move. The rational part of my brain screamed that this was wrong, that public transportation didn't work like this, that words on a screen couldn't be a destination. And NBSP, the hooded man, placed a hand on my shoulder. His fingers were cold through my jacket and I flinched. And NBSP, go, he said softly, or you'll be walking. And NBSP, I stepped forward. And NBSP, the first thing I noticed was the smell. Not exhaust, not rubber, not the sour-sweet scent of old seats. And NBSP, the bus smelled like dust and rain-soaked cardboard, like a basement that's been closed too long. Underneath it, faintly, was something else, something metallic again, like pennies, like blood. And NBSP, the second thing I noticed was the driver. And NBSP, he sat behind the wheel in a crisp uniform that looked too clean for the bus. His hat brim shadowed his face, but not completely. Enough light touched his mouth for me to see it curved upward, not quite a smile, more like a polite readiness. And NBSP, when I stepped onto the first stair, he turned his head, slow and smooth, like a puppet on a careful string. And NBSP, even in, he said. His voice was warm, too warm, like a hand on your back guiding you forward. And NBSP, I clutched my apron tighter. Evening. And NBSP, he looked at me for a moment longer than a bus driver should. His eyes were dark, not brown dark, like the inside of a bottle. And NBSP name? He asked, as if it were a fare. And NBSP, my throat tightened. The hooded man's warning rose in my mind like a flare. And NBSP just, me, I said, forcing a small laugh. Do you take cards? And NBSP, the driver's smile widened by a fraction. No charge tonight, he said. Just take a seat. And NBSP, I walked down the aisle, heart thudding, trying not to look too hard at anything. And NBSP, there were passengers, but not the way there should have been. Not chatting, not scrolling phones, not slumped in sleep. They sat very still, staring straight ahead or out the dark windows, hands folded in laps like they were attending a funeral. And NBSP, their faces seemed wrong. And NBSP, not monstrous, not obviously inhuman. Just wrong in the way a wax figure is wrong, the skin too smooth, the expressions too fixed, the eyes too glassy. And NBSP, I chose a seat near the middle because sitting up front felt like an invitation and sitting in the back felt like a trap. The vinyl was cold, damp in a way that made my skin crawl. I pressed my palms against my jeans and tried not to imagine what had soaked into these seats before me. And NBSP, the doors side shut, and NBSP, the bus moved. And NBSP, no lurch, no engine roar. It simply began to glide forward, and the street outside slid away like scenery. And NBSP, I expected to see familiar intersections, the corner store, the park with the cracked fountain. But as the bus rolled, the city dissolved, and NBSP streetlights thinned, then vanished. Buildings became silhouettes, then shadows, then nothing at all. The mist outside thickened until it pressed flat against the windows like pale flesh. And NBSP, a voice crackled overhead, but not the usual automated announcement. It was the driver's voice, intimate and close, like he was speaking directly into my ear. And NBSP, midnight service, he said, next stop, whichever one you deserve. And NBSP, a few passengers shifted. Not much. Just enough to remind me they were alive or something like it. And NBSP, my mouth went dry. I leaned toward the aisle and whispered to the person across from me, a woman in a gray coat with hair pinned neatly back. "Excuse me," I said. "Do you know where this bus is going?" And NBSP slowly, the woman turned her head, and NBSP, her face was pale and calm. Her lips slightly parted as if she'd been about to speak when the world stopped. Her eyes met mine, and for a second I felt the sensation of stepping too close to a ledge vertigo, the pull of falling. "And NBSP home," she breathed. "And NBSP," then she turned back forward, movement stiff, like joints that hadn't been used in a long time. And NBSP, a cold sweat prickled along my spine. And NBSP, I checked my phone. And NBSP, no service. And NBSP, the battery icon blinked red 3% like my lifeline was bleeding out. And NBSP, the bus hummed, low and constant, like a lullaby sung by something that didn't understand sleep. And NBSP, minutes passed, or hours. Time didn't feel shaped properly. The windows showed only mist, but occasionally, just for a blink, I thought I saw shapes moving within it. Not cars, not people. Something long and pale drifting alongside the bus like a curious fish. And NBSP, then the bus slowed. And NBSP, not for a stop, not for a light. It slowed like it was arriving somewhere important. And NBSP, the overhead speaker crackled. And NBSP, stop request, the driver murmured. And NBSP, my stomach clenched. I hadn't pulled any cord. And NBSP, no one had. And NBSP, yet the red stop requested sign above the aisle flickered on, glowing like an accusation. And NBSP, a man 2 rows ahead, stood. And NBSP, he moved with hesitation, like his body didn't fully belong to him. He clutched the pole for balance and shuffled toward the front. His coat hung too loose on his frame, and as he passed under the dim interior lights, I noticed his shoes were soaked, leaving dark, wet prints on the aisle. And NBSP, he reached the front doors and looked back, eyes wide, as if silently begging someone to stop him. And NBSP, the driver, turned slightly in his seat. "This yours?" he asked kindly. And NBSP, the man's lips trembled. He began, and that was all he got. And NBSP, the driver's hand, shot out with impossible speed and pressed 2 fingers gently to the man's forehead. And NBSP, the man went still. And NBSP, not unconscious still, like a paused video. And NBSP, the driver, leaned closer, voice soft enough that I could barely hear it over the hum. "Name," he whispered. And NBSP, the man's eyes darted, frantic, trapped in his frozen body. His lips moved like he was trying not to speak, like he was fighting a reflex. And NBSP then, in a voice that sounded scraped raw, he said, "E. Evan." And NBSP, the driver, sighed, satisfied. "There you are," he said, and smiled wide. And NBSP, the front doors folded open. And NBSP, but outside wasn't a street. And NBSP outside was a porch. And NBSP, a wooden porch slick with rain, lit by a single bulb that burned a deep, wet red. And NBSP, my heart slammed against my ribs so hard it hurt. And NBSP, the porch belonged to a house that sat alone in the mist, its windows dark, its door slightly ajar like a mouth about to speak. And NBSP, the driver, lifted a hand and gently pushed Evan forward. And NBSP Evan stumbled off the bus, his feet hitting the porch boards with a soft thud. He tried to turn back, tried to run, tried to do anything. And NBSP, but the moment he stepped into the red light, his movements slowed, as if the air around the porch was thick syrup. And NBSP, the door of the house, opened wider. And NBSP, something inside, exhaled. And NBSP and Evan, who had given his name, walked forward like a sleepwalker, drawn by an invisible thread. And NBSP, the door shut behind him. And NBSP, the porch light, remained red. And NBSP, the bus doors folded closed. And NBSP, the stop requested sign, blinked off. And NBSP, the bus, began to glide forward again, leaving the porch and the house and whatever had waited there dissolving into mist. And NBSP, I sat frozen, my breath shallow, my nails digging crescents into my palm. And NBSP, a new realization settled into me, cold and heavy. And NBSP, this wasn't a bus route. And NBSP, it was a delivery. And NBSP, I looked down the aisle at the still passengers. I wondered how many of them had given their names. How many had pulled the cord early, thinking they could outsmart whatever rules governed this midnight service. And NBSP, my phone buzzed weakly, one last gasp of battery life. And NBSP, the screen lit with a single notification, but it wasn't a text, and it wasn't a call. And NBSP, it was a bus alert. And NBSP, midnight service. And NBSP, approaching. Your stop. And NBSP, my throat tightened so hard I could barely swallow. And NBSP, I hadn't requested a stop. And NBSP, but maybe the bus didn't need you to. And NBSP, maybe the bus knew where you belonged the moment you stepped on. And NBSP, the mist outside the windows began to thin, revealing familiar shapes like buildings returning into existence. Streetlights, signs, a corner store with a broken neon letter, my neighborhood. And NBSP relief surged through me so fast it almost made me dizzy. And NBSP, then the bus slowed again, and I saw what it was slowing for. And NBSP, my apartment building, stood ahead, but the lights in the windows were wrong. Too red, too pulsing. The street lamp outside my building flickered, its yellow glow bleeding into crimson like an infection spreading. And NBSP, and there, at the entrance to my building where the intercom usually buzzed, where the cracked glass door always stuck, was a porch. And NBSP, a porch that hadn't been there yesterday. And NBSP, a wooden porch slick with rain. And NBSP, a single bulb above it burning a thick, wet red. And NBSP, my stomach turned to ice. And NBSP, the overhead speaker crackled and the driver's voice purred through the bus, warm as a smile you can't trust. And NBSP, home, he said, end of the line. And NBSP, the red stop requested sign flickered on by itself. And NBSP, my hands shook as I reached up, slowly, deliberately, and wrapped my fingers around the yellow cord above my seat. And NBSP, I thought of the hooded man's warning, don't pull the cord early. And NBSP, but what counted as early when the bus decided your stop. And NBSP, my breath came in short, panicked bursts. My mind raced for loopholes, for logic, for anything that could save me. If I didn't get off, would it loop back? Would it take me somewhere worse? Was this the best outcome I was going to get? And NBSP, the bus's doors hissed softly, readying. And NBSP, the driver turned his head just enough that I saw the edge of his smile in the mirror. And NBSP name? He asked, gentle as a lullaby. And NBSP, I swallowed. My tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth. And NBSP, if I gave him my name, I felt certain I'd become like Evanslow, obedient, delivered. And NBSP, if I didn't, what? And NBSP, I forced my voice out, hoarse. You already know, I said. And NBSP, the driver's smile faltered. And NBSP, just a fraction. And NBSP, the bus shuddered an almost imperceptible tremor like it disliked that answer. And NBSP, the passengers around me didn't move, but I felt their attention sharpen, like knives turning toward me in the dark. And NBSP, the driver's voice came again, softer now, edged with something that wasn't warmth. And NBSP, we like to hear it, he said. And NBSP, I tightened my grip on the cord until my fingers hurt. I stared at the red porch outside the door, at the way the bulb seemed to pulse like a heartbeat, at the door behind it that looked slightly ajar, waiting. And NBSP, I thought about my apartment, about the stain on the ceiling, about my neighbor's arguments, about the radiator's hiss, about the awful comfort of knowing what was waiting for me there. And NBSP, then I realized the cruelest part. And NBSP, the bus wasn't offering me my home. And NBSP, it was offering me the version of home I deserved for knocking on the wrong door, stepping onto the wrong bus, wanting to go somewhere safe without paying the price. And NBSP, the doors began to open. And NBSP, and in the split-second gap, as the first line of cold red light spilled into the aisle, I made my decision not out of bravery, but out of terror. And NBSP, I yanked the cord hard, not to request a stop, but like I was trying to rip the whole thing out. And NBSP, the bus lights flickered. And NBSP, the hum deepened into a groan. And NBSP, the passengers' heads snapped toward me in perfect unison, their movements too synchronized to be human. And NBSP, the driver, jerked his head fully around, and for the first time I saw his face clearly. And NBSP, there were no eyes. And NBSP, only two small circles of red glass, set into the shadow like lenses. And NBSP, behind them, something watched. And NBSP, his mouth stretched wider than skin should allow, and his voice, when it came, wasn't warm anymore. It was the sound of a door opening on rusty hinges. And NBSP, wrong, he whispered. And NBSP, the cord in my hand went slack. And NBSP, not because I let go, and NBSP because it had become something else. And NBSP, a thin strip of skin, still warm, still faintly vibrating like a severed nerve. And NBSP, I screamed and stumbled backward, scrambling over the seat, trying to get away from the doors, from the porch, from the driver's hungry attention. And NBSP, the bus lurched not forward, not backward, but sideways, as if it was slipping off the road into something deeper. And NBSP outside, the street dissolved again into mist. And NBSP, the porch vanished. And NBSP, the world thinned. And NBSP, and the last thing I heard, before the bus swallowed me into the midnight service where stops weren't places but punishments, was the driver's soft, satisfied sigh. And NBSP, now we can take you where you really belong. And NBSP, and somewhere in the dark beyond the windows, something knocked back. And NBSP Story 3 and NBSP Work 911 Dispatch. The call I got last night wasn't possible. And NBSP Dispatch has a rhythm that sinks into your bones. And NBSP, it's the headset clamp against your hairline. The glow of the CAD screen bleaching the world into a grid of addresses and incident codes. The constant low chatter units checking in. Supervisors leaning over shoulders. Phones ringing like heartbeats you can't ignore. After a while, your brain stops hearing panic and starts hearing procedure. You learn how to keep your voice steady when someone else's life is tipping. And NBSP, that's what they train you for. And NBSP, what they don't train you for is the one kind of call that doesn't fit inside any protocol. And NBSP last night started ordinary. And NBSP, it was a late shift. The kind where the room goes quieter after midnight. Not because emergencies stop, but because the city changes character. Daytime chaos is loud and public car accidents at busy intersections, shoplifters caught in fluorescent aisles. Night chaos is private. It's behind closed doors. It's the kind of fear that whispers. And NBSP at 1:13 a.m., I took a call that came in on a dead line. And NBSP, I didn't know it was dead at first. On my screen, it populated as a landline, no GPS ping, no phase the second data, just an old address block in the system with a red flag. Disconnected/no service. And NBSP, those happen sometimes. Old entries, mistakes, people moving, numbers reassigned. The call still rings in though if the system glitches or the line catches a stray current. And NBSP, usually you answer and get silence. And NBSP, I clicked in. 911, what is the address of your emergency? And NBSP, for a beat, all I heard was the hum of the room, my co-workers' muted voices, the distant clack of keys, the soft static of my own headset. And NBSP, then someone whispered, right into my ear. And NBSP, not through the mic like a normal caller, not with the hollow echo of a cheap phone. It sounded like a person leaning close to the headset itself. And NBSP, don't hang up, the voice said. And NBSP, my hand paused over the keyboard. My spine went tight. And NBSP, sir or ma'am, I said, keeping my tone even gentle. Firm, I need the address you're calling from. And NBSP, a breath came through the line, slow and careful, as if the person was trying not to make noise. You can't send them, the voice whispered. And NBSP, that's not your decision, I said automatically. If you're in danger, we're going to get help to you. Tell me where you are. And NBSP, silence. And NBSP, then, very softly, I'm in your building. And NBSP, I stared at my screen. And NBSP, we get prank calls, sure. We get sick calls to people who say impossible things because their brains are breaking under stress. But this voice didn't sound drunk or high or confused. It sounded controlled, the way someone sounds when they're whispering in a place where whispering isn't enough. And NBSP, I said, okay, what's your name? And NBSP, no, the voice replied. Immediate, flat, don't do that. And NBSP, a tremor ran through my fingers. I kept typing anyway, opening a new incident card because that's what you do when your instinct wants to freeze you, make your hands obey muscle memory. And NBSP, are you in the dispatch center? I asked. And NBSP, a tiny laugh, not amused, not kind, something like relief. Not in the room, the voice said, under it. And NBSP, my mouth went dry. And NBSP, I told myself it was a sick prank. Someone with access to an old line, someone who'd found the center's number, someone trying to sound scary. It had to be. And NBSP, listen, I said. Voice low, measured. I can't help you unless you tell me exactly where you are. And NBSP you can, the voice whispered. You just don't want to. And NBSP, I felt my shoulders stiffen. On my screen, the number field showed zeros and dashes like a blank face. No Annie, no Ali, nothing to trace, nothing to ping. And NBSP, tell me what's happening, I said. And NBSP, for a moment, all I heard was something faint, a background sound. And NBSP, not traffic, not a TV, not wind. And NBSP, a steady rhythmic clicking. And NBSP like a metronome. And NBSP like someone tapping a fingernail against plastic. And NBSP, then the voice returned, even closer. They're trying to get in, it said. And NBSP, who is? And NBSP, a pause, and then us. And NBSP, my breath hitched, almost silent, but I felt it in my ribs. And NBSP, okay, I said, forcing calm into my tone like it was a wedge I could jam into a closing door. What do you mean us? How many people are with you? And NBSP, the tapping sped up, as if my questions excited it. And NBSP 1, the voice said, and more. And NBSP, my eyes flicked to the digital clock above the supervisor's desk. 1:16 a.m. 3 minutes on the line. Long enough for an officer to be rolling if I had an address. Long enough for the rational part of my brain to start losing ground to the animal part that noticed patterns. And NBSP because the tapping in the background matched something else. And NBSP something in my environment. And NBSP, I held my breath and listened beyond the call into the room. And NBSP, and there it was. And NBSP, a faint, almost inaudible tapping coming from somewhere beneath my workstation. And NBSP, not loud, not obvious. The kind of noise you'd normally write off as a pipe cooling or a loose panel vibrating. And NBSP, but it was in the same rhythm. And NBSP as if the call wasn't coming through the phone at all. And NBSP as if it was coming through the floor. And NBSP, my stomach turned cold. And NBSP, I forced my eyes to stay on the screen. You said you're under the building, I said, carefully. Under what part? And NBSP, under you, the voice whispered. And NBSP, my hand jerked, my mouse skittered. I gripped the edge of my desk, knuckles whitening, and tried not to look down. And NBSP, ma'am, I said, guessing now because the voice was thin enough to be anything. What's your emergency? And NBSP, a soft inhale. Then, with a strange tenderness, you're the emergency, it said. And NBSP, the tapping under my desk, grew louder. And NBSP, I couldn't pretend it was pipes anymore. It had intention. It had timing. And NBSP, I glanced sideways. Nobody else reacted. My coworker 2 seats down was sipping coffee, eyes on her own call. Across the room, someone laughed quietly at something on their screen. Normal, ordinary. And NBSP, and underneath my desk, tap, tap, tap. And NBSP, my pulse hammered in my throat. Can you hear me? I asked the voice and hated how small I sounded. And NBSP, yes, it said. Can you hear yourself? And NBSP, that made no sense, except it did suddenly in a way that made my skin crawl. And NBSP, because under the voice, under the tapping, there was something else now so faint I thought I imagined it. And NBSP, a second voice. And NBSP, my voice. And NBSP, not live, not present, a recording. And NBSP, a snippet of me from some other call, some other night, saying the most common phrase in my life. And NBSP, 911, what is the address of your emergency? And NBSP, the caller whispered, you say that a lot. And NBSP, my blood ran colder. How are you doing that? And NBSP, the tapping became a scrape, like fingernails dragging across the underside of the desk. And NBSP, training, the voice said, patterns, repetition. You build doors out of words. You don't even know you're doing it. And NBSP, I swallowed. My mouth tasted like metal. Tell me what you want. And NBSP, a pause. And NBSP, then, the softest sound of all, a smile you could hear without seeing it. And NBSP, answer, it whispered. And NBSP, the overhead lights flickered. And NBSP, not the whole room, just the strip above my row of desks. A quick dim bright pulse like an eyelid. And NBSP, my CAD screen glitched for a fraction of a second, and in that momentary distortion I saw something that wasn't my interface. And NBSP, a map. And NBSP, not the city grid, not our jurisdiction. And NBSP, a tight, close-up blueprint view of the building we sat in. as if someone had pulled it up in the system. Basement levels included. And NBSP, except the basement level showed a shape I'd never seen on any plan. A narrow corridor running beneath the dispatch floor like a throat. And NBSP, and at the point directly under my desk, there was a blinking icon. And NBSP, a call marker. And NBSP as if the system believed the caller's location. And NBSP as if the caller was exactly where they said they were. And NBSP supervisor, I tried to say, but my voice snagged on fear and came out as a whisper. And NBSP, the caller, whispered too, perfectly overlapping me. Supervisor. And NBSP, my skin prickled. The hair on my arms rose. And NBSP then, very softly, the caller said, "Do you remember the first call you ever took?" And NBSP, my chest tightened. I did. Everyone does. Mine had been a domestic woman crying, man shouting, a child screaming in the background. I'd been so new my hands shook, so focused on getting the address right that I barely noticed I was trembling. And NBSP, you told her to stay on the line, the voice said. And NBSP, how do I began? And NBSP, you promised. It whispered. You said, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. And NBSP, my throat closed. The tapping under my desk stopped. And NBSP, for a heartbeat, silence. And NBSP, then something pushed from below. And NBSP, not hard enough to shove the desk upward, but enough to make the metal frame vibrate. Enough to make my coffee cup ripple. And NBSP, I shot to my feet, chair squealing. Heads turned. My coworker frowned at me. Across the room, the supervisor looked up, eyebrows raised like, what are you doing? And NBSP, I forced my face into something neutral. I couldn't explain. How do you say? Someone is calling from under my desk on a disconnected line, and the floor is tapping back without sounding like you need medical leave. And NBSP, the voice in my headset, was very calm now. You stood up, it observed. And NBSP, I pulled the headset off one ear, half expecting to find nothing, half expecting to find a hand. And NBSP, listen, I said, low, through clenched teeth. If you're in the building, I can send officers. I cannot. NBSP, no, the voice said. You can't send them to where we are. And NBSP, the room felt too bright, too normal, like a stage set. And NBSP, I stared at my desk. And NBSP, under it, the shadow was deeper than it should have been, like the light didn't know how to go there. And NBSP, my CAD screen flickered again. And NBSP, a new line of text appeared in the incident notes field. Typed without my hands touching the keyboard. And NBSP opened the door, and NBSP, I froze. And NBSP, my fingers hovered above the keys, useless. And NBSP, on the line, the voice whispered, you hear calls all night from people who can't be helped. Fires too big, bodies too broken, hearts that stop. You listen, and you listen, and you listen. And NBSP, the tapping resumed, but slower now, patient. And NBSP, sometimes, the voice said gently, you want a call you can actually fix. And NBSP, my mouth went dry. What door? And NBSP, the voice exhaled, pleased. And NBSP, the one you built, it whispered. Out of your promises. And NBSP, under my desk, the darkness moved like something shifting in a confined space, testing its edges. And NBSP, I stepped back, heartbeat loud in my ears. My supervisor started walking toward me, concern on his face now. You okay? He asked, voice muffled by distance. And NBSP, I opened my mouth to answer him, and NBSP in my headset, still on my other ear, whispered my own voice back at me, perfectly. And NBSP 911, that said, what is the address of your emergency? And NBSP, my supervisor, stopped, looking confused. And NBSP, because he hadn't heard it. And NBSP, only I had. And NBSP, the call timer on my screen kept running. 1:21 a.m., 8 minutes now. Too long. Impossible for a deadline. Impossible for anything that wasn't. And NBSP, the voice came one last time, soft as a fingertip on glass. And NBSP, say you'll stay, it whispered, and we can come up. And NBSP, my throat tightened around a scream I couldn't make. I wanted to rip out every cable, smash the phone, tear the floorboards up with my hands. I wanted to run. And NBSP, but I also knew something awful. Something that made my stomach twist with a dispatcher's kind of guilt. And NBSP, people call 911 because they believe a voice can reach them through anything. And NBSP walls, night, fear, distance. And NBSP if a voice could reach me through the floor, through a disconnected line, through a place that shouldn't exist. And NBSP, then maybe I'd been wrong about what was possible all along. And NBSP, I didn't answer. And NBSP, I didn't say I'd stay. And NBSP, I stared at the dark under my desk and held my breath and waited for my supervisor to demand an explanation I couldn't give. And NBSP on the screen, the typed message erased itself letter by letter. And NBSP, the call ended without a click. And NBSP just gone. And NBSP, the room's noise surged back like someone had turned the world up. Phones rang, radios crackled. Someone laughed again. Normal. And NBSP, too normal. And NBSP, my supervisor, asked me if I needed a break. I nodded, grateful for an excuse, and walked to the restroom with legs that felt borrowed. And NBSP, in the bathroom mirror, my face looked pale and tired and human. And NBSP until I leaned closer. And NBSP until I noticed, faintly in the harsh fluorescent light, 2 red pressure marks on the side of my head where my headset had rested. And NBSP, like fingertips. And NBSP, and on my phone, in the notifications, was a voicemail I hadn't received. And NBSP, no number, no timestamp, just a single audio file titled, and NBSP, stay on the line. And NBSP, I haven't played it. And NBSP, because I know what I'll hear. And NBSP, not a stranger. And NBSP, not a prank. And NBSP, just my own voice, whispering back from somewhere under the building, asking me politely, patiently, and NBSP to open the door. And NBSP and NBSP.